Welcome back, students. Let us start part 3 of the chapter Microorganisms, Friend and Foe. Now in this slide you can see that how diseases are caused by the microorganisms in animals. Now the microorganisms, they not only cause diseases in humans but also in animals and plants. Now if you see the example, anthrax is a dangerous human and cattle disease caused by a bacterium called Bacillus anthracis. What is the name of the bacterium? Bacillus anthracis. Foot and mouth disease of cattle is caused by a virus. Bird flu affects the poultry and it is caused by a virus. Same way the swine flu, another disease caused by a virus, affects the pigs. Now the next we can see the disease causing organisms in plants. There are several microorganisms which cause diseases in plants like wheat, rice, potato, sugarcane, orange, apple, etc. Now if we take an example of rust of wheat, which is caused by a fungus. Yellow vein mosaic of lady's finger is caused by a virus. Leaf curl disease of bean, then pea, soybean, cotton is caused by virus. So the diseases reduce the yield of the crops. They can be controlled by the use of certain chemicals which kill the microbes. Now the next topic is food poisoning. So when we are talking about food poisoning, we know that food poisoning is caused due to the consumption of food spoiled by some microorganisms. Now the microbes that grow on our food sometimes produce toxic substances. The food becomes smelly and poisonous, causing serious illness and even death due to their presence. So it is very important that we should preserve our food to prevent it from being spoiled. Now next we can see here about the food preservation, how we can preserve the food. So here we can see on the screen the various ways are written over here, like chemical method, common salt as preservative, sugar as preservative, oil and vinegar as preservative, by heat and cold treatment, storage and packing, and by canning. Okay, now under food preservation, first of all we are going to discuss about the chemical method, how chemical method can be used to preserve the food. Now the salts and edible oils are the common chemicals which is used usually to check the growth of the microorganisms. So therefore they are called as preservatives. Now adding salt and oils in the pickle prevents the attack of microbes. The same way the sodium benzoate and sodium metabisulfite are some common preservatives which are used in jams and squashes to check the spoilage. So by these way we can preserve the food, that is by the chemical method. Next one, by how we can preserve the food by the common salt. Generally to preserve meat and fish, the dry salt is added to check the growth of the microbes. What it does, it absorbs the moisture from them and thus inhibiting the growth of the microorganism. So we can say that salting is also used to preserve these fishes and meat. Even they are used to preserve the amla, raw mangoes, tamarind, etc. So this is the way to preserve the food. The next is sugar as preservative. Here we can see that when we eat jam, jellies and squashes, where the sugar is used to preserve it. Actually the sugar reduces the moisture content which inhibits the growth of the food spoiling microbes. Then is oil and vinegar as preservative. Here again we can say the thing that by using oil and vinegar, that is the acetic acid, which we can stop the spoilage of pickles, because bacteria cannot grow in an environment formed due to these preservatives. Same with the vegetables, fruits, fish and meats are often preserved by this method. Next is the heat and cold treatment. Now here what we can do, both lower and higher temperature prevents the growth of microorganisms, we know. So we can say that simply keeping the food in the refrigerator prevents it from the spoilage, as low temperature inhibits the growth of microbes. Now when the milk is heated to about 70 degrees Celsius for 15 to 13 seconds and then suddenly chilled and stored, it prevents the growth of the microbes. So this method is called pasteurization, and this process was discovered by a French scientist, Louis Pasteur. Okay, so we can say that this process is known as pasteurization. Then the next one is the storage and packing. Now the food items are also prevented by packing them in airtight packets, as we see when we have chips or any food that comes in packet. Those are preserved in that way only. So these days the dried fruits and even the vegetables are sold in sealed airtight packets to prevent the attack of the microorganisms. Next is canning. An effective way of preserving the food is to store it in a airtight containers called cans, and the food like jams, vegetables, soft drinks and even cooked food are canned properly by this process known as canning. Next, an important topic, that is nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen is an essential nutrient for plants. As we know that nitrogen constitutes about 78% of the atmosphere. Now the nitrogen also constitutes part of the proteins in living beings, but plants cannot assimilate this atmospheric nitrogen directly. So it needs to be converted into absorbable nitrogen compounds like nitrates, nitrites and ammonium to be utilized by the plants. Now there are some organisms living in the soil which convert the atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium compounds which are absorbed by the soil. So we can say that the conversion of free atmospheric nitrogen into useful nitrogenous compound is called nitrogen fixation. So fixation is the first step in the process of making nitrogen usable for the plants. And for this we know that earlier also we have discussed about the bacteria, that is rhizobium bacteria. The bacterium rhizobium in the root nodules of leguminous plants helps in the fixation of nitrogen. Now sometimes nitrogen gets fixed through the action of lightning also. So the amount of nitrogen in the atmosphere remain constant by the nitrogen cycle. Now here we are going to discuss about the nitrogen cycle in detail. Now as we know that nitrogen is an essential constituent of all living as a part of proteins, chlorophyll, nucleic acid and vitamins. So it is the most abundant constituent of the air, but it cannot be used directly by the plants and animals. So the cycle of processes in which the nitrogen in the atmosphere is passed into the soil and life forms and then released back into the atmosphere is called nitrogen cycle. I must repeat again this one. The cycle of processes in which nitrogen in the atmosphere is passed into the soil and life forms and then released back into the atmosphere is called nitrogen cycle. Now here you can see the atmospheric nitrogen at the top where it is written atmospheric nitrogen, and now this atmospheric nitrogen, it is converted into nitrogenous compounds like ammonium, that is NH4. Okay, with the help of the nitrogen fixing bacteria. So which are the nitrogen fixing bacteria? We can say the rhizobium bacteria. So what they do, they convert the atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium. Now we can say that ammonium gets changed into nitrates by the action of the bacteria. This process is called nitrification. These nitrates can directly be taken by the plants and synthesized as plant protein. So these proteins are passed to animals through the food chain and from plant to herbivores and from herbivores to carnivores. So this total process is known as assimilation. Understood? Now when the plants and animals die, the bacteria and fungi present in the soil convert the nitrogenous waste into nitrogenous compounds. That means they act as decomposers. So what they do, they convert into nitrogenous compounds which are used by the plants again. So this process is called ammonification. Certain other bacteria called denitrifying bacteria which convert some part of them to nitrogen gas which goes back into the atmosphere, and this is called denitrification. So as a result, what happens? The percentage of nitrogen in the atmosphere remains more or less constant. So this is all about the third part of the chapter.